We've been talking about how when a person increases in light, and receives what most people call as enlightenment, that's really not the end of the problems that he faces. It's interesting that it's kind of an instinct for most people on a spiritual quest to want to have an end to their journey, like the fundamentalist religion person. Once he finds Christ, well, that's it. That's the end of his journey. Uh, Quest is over. He's found what he wants, and now he can just relax and wait for death, pretty much. But that's not the way it goes for the person that is truly enlightened. The truly enlightened person realizes there is no end. The idea of eternal progression is actually something real, and there is no end. And thank God. Could you imagine reaching an end of progression? What would it be like if you reached an end of progression? Now, when you reach a goal, it's great to have a rest. There's nothing wrong with having a rest. But do you want to rest forever? Can you imagine reaching a goal? Let's pick it here in life. What happens a lot of people after they retire? Statistics show that when people retire, a lot of people die within a short period after they retire, just because yet the ones that live longer are people that continue to have some type of goal. Maybe after they retire, they still want to do something else. But the guy that just wants to just relax, they often don't live very long. There's something about having a goal that gives a person a more greater zest for life. So it's all right to have a goal, reach it, rest, but after you rest, then you need another goal. And yet people think in heaven they're just going to rest, take it easy for eternity, and praise God and sing with angels, and that's going to be that way for ever and ever and ever. And when you think of it, that would be turn into a hell after a period of time, because you always want to have something new. And this is one of the things that DK goes into, is that after a person reaches a degree of enlightenment, he may have a little period of rest, but then he's going to have other things come up that he's going to have to handle, new goals to achieve, and there'll always be other things come up. And thank God, because we don't want to be bored for eternity. We don't want to burn in hell for eternity either, on the other end of the spectrum. Either one would be kind of, matter of fact, DK says either one is equally distressful to think about. being bored for eternity, or being in hell for eternity. Either one is not does not excite a person like
Mark Twain.
Like old Rick over here, for instance.
Mark Twain said he can never understand how these Christians think they could be happy playing harps forever when they can't barely stand an hour on church.
Yeah, I remember when I used to go to church, every once in a while something would happen where we get out early, and everybody would be so happy they got out early, and I used to think, these guys claim to really enjoy going to church so much. How come they're so happy when we are able to get out early? So I think, yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about. He says the greater light brings freedom and power, as well as dominance over the emotions. Light, reason, and mind lead to dominion over the emotions. What light reveals may go against emotion, he says, but not the mind. So have you ever had something revealed to you that revealed something that went against what you felt, what your emotions were attached to? Well, a story I've told you several times. When I was young, my favorite singer was Del Shannon in the 60s. And my favorite song was Runaway. And I thought I was a great singer. Matter of fact, I sang that song all the time, and all my family just about drove them crazy. And they kept telling me to shut up and be quiet. But anyway, I sang that song quite a bit, and it has a falsetto, wah, 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 wonder, and so I thought I was such a good singer that maybe I was going to even be a rock star someday or something. And my dad was visiting. They were divorced at the time, but he came to visit, and he heard me singing, and he was just disgusted. So he went and borrowed a tape recorder, and back then tape recorders were hard to get a hold of. But he went out of his way to borrow this tape recorder, and he brought the tape recorder in the house, and he says, "Okay, sing that song that you've been singing." And so I sang the song in there, and then he played it back to me. And I was devastated. I did not sound anything like I thought I was sounding. But that was where the truth went totally against what I was feeling. And sometimes this happens to us in the fact that we're faced with something that's true that goes against our feeling. Maybe you've fallen in love with somebody and they don't love you back, and you think they love you back, and you find out no, they just want to be friends. There's all kinds of things that happen, but there are times when we're faced with a stark reality that goes against what we really wanted to be true. And I remember when I was a young missionary in the Mormon church, I thought to myself, now let's suppose I could look 20 or 30 years in the future. What is the most scary thing that I could see? And I would think, the most terrible thing I could think of is if I got thrown out of the church. I thought, boy, that would be terrible. And sure enough, several number of years in the future, I did get thrown out. So, but I got thrown out because I questioned the prophet. I thought I knew stuff that he didn't know, and they did not like that at all. So I wasn't in harmony. And so right now, I look upon it as graduation. That's what people call it in the various churches that graduate to more esoteric thinking. They call it graduation, because the churches of the world are kind of like kindergartens, and they prepare us for our next step. They do a good service. Kids need kindergarten to get them started, and the churches of the world, that's their job, is to get people started on the spiritual path, point them in the right direction, teach them right and wrong and all these things. And then after you learn these basics, then you have to go somewhere. And eventually people will outgrow the churches and move on to things a little bit deeper. And that's one thing about DK. He certainly tries to take us deeper. He says there are those who believe that only a few enlightened and eternal souls are worthy of eternal life, he says. And there's a problem, he says, of people feeling special when they are in this situation. They feel that God looks upon them with favor more than he looks upon his other children. Matter of fact, some religions teach that God already knows who's going to be saved and who isn't, and these people that aren't going to be saved just have never been in his favor from day one, pretty much. Others, even those that have graduated from the churches and gone on to higher spiritual learning, have a feeling of specialness about them. And this feeling of specialness is something that has to be overcome. Uh, Matter of fact, I was thinking of this group here. It's if, let's say, I take you as a group and I praise you and I say, hey, you guys are a really great group, which I think you are. Is there something wrong with me doing that? And I would think, no, that's not wrong. Thinking, seeing the group as it really is, this is a really good group we have here. But where people go amiss is if they feel they're more special than the other people without having, especially without having any reason behind it, just because maybe uh, they are who they are. Now, there are special things a person can do. A person can learn a special talent. A person can have a special ability to serve. So the the word special, just like every other word, is a duality. There's a duality to all things. So there is such a thing as specialness in the degree that uh, some people achieve more than others. Compared to the average seeker, for instance, a master would be in a kind of a special category, but the feeling of specialness is what the disciple wants to avoid. He must see himself as not uh, more more of a favorite son or daughter than his brother is. And the best way to look at that is, especially if you've ever had children, is to think of how you treat your children. At least most parents are pretty good about this. Most parents will love all of their children and try to not treat one better than the other unless they, legitimately earned a promised reward of some kind. But they give them all an equal opportunity, love them all the same, and if they're in need, if they need help, they're prepared to help the one just as much as they're willing to help the other. And Christ made the statement that if we, being evil, understand how to give our children good gifts, he says, do you not think that God, being good, can excel and give better gifts than a parent can give his son or daughter? And that's a really interesting principle to meditate on, is that God's gifts are better than we could dream up for our own children, and which goes entirely against the grain of what the religions teach, where God is just eager as the dickens to send people to hell for the least infringement. And he's going to send them to hell for what? Maybe they just don't have the right idea of Jesus. For instance, the churches have all kinds of different ideas of who and what Jesus is. And some think that God will send a sincere person, say a person is very sincere, he's studied in his religion, he has a wrong concept of Jesus, but he's entirely sincere about it. Some religions will teach this guy's going to hell because he didn't have the right idea of what Jesus is or whatever, or what salvation is. So when you think of the fairness, though, of a parent toward multiple children, and then amplify and then figure that God is a lot better at dealing abundantly with his kids than we are with ours, then that's an interesting way to look at it. Okay. Then he makes this statement about the mind. He talks about the importance of that when a person achieves a degree of enlightenment, it's through the power of the mind, the higher part of the mind. Now, the mind is confused when teachers talk about the mind. A lot of people equate mind with brain. And one of the things that I teach is brain activity is not thinking. The brain itself is merely a sophisticated computer, but the mind is actually higher than the feeling nature. And a lot of people think the feelings need to be paid more attention to than the mind. But the higher mind can govern the feelings. The higher mind has the mind that participates in the decision making has power to control the emotions and has power to override the emotions. The emotions doesn't have power to override the mind unless the mind yields to the emotions. But unless the mind yields, the mind has more power than the emotions. The mind can make the decisions no matter what the emotions think. So if you're angry at somebody, the mind can say, "Hey, you're not going to do anything to harm this person because that would be wrong." So your mind can override your feelings that you want to strangle the guy and keep you from doing it. Okay, so the mind is a saving grace in us. And the DK says this about people. He says scarcely 1 in 10,000 utilizes the inherent power of their mind in its fullness. And so only about 1 in 10,000. So what we want to do is, all of us in this group, we want to be one of those 1 in 10,000 that function in the mental body, where we have power to say, now the feelings are going the wrong direction, so I'm going to stop them and not going to let them be the decision maker. The mind will be the decision maker. And then there's higher than mind. Remember, if you've read The Immortal, that you're not your body, you're not your emotions, and you're also not your mind. But these are all vehicles that the spirit, the consciousness uses. The use of 2 factors differentiate man from the animal. One of these factors is pain, he says, and the other is the faculty of discrimination. Now, he used the word discrimination before it become a really bad word, but he uses it when I talk about discrimination, because it's got such a negative connotation these days. I use the word discernment, and he uses it in that context to be able to discern truth from error is the power of discrimination when he uses that word and speaks of it. Okay, he says, through pain and learning, we utilize the power of choice in the realm of ideas. Man is steadily forging ahead toward full liberty and full control of the earth, which is his right to inherit. Okay, so it's interesting that we learn from pain a lot more than the animals do. This is one of the things that raises us above the animals, is when we have pain, we have a memory of that pain in our mind, and we think, now we want to avoid this pain in the future, so what can I do? This affects animals somewhat, but especially us, because we register the details in our memory and try to calculate how to avoid it. The animals have a direct reaction to pain. They remember it and they equate it just really on a basic level and without using mind, whereas the humans use mind to associate with pain and to learn from pain. And like he says, the other is discernment or discrimination. So we look at situations and we figure out what to do. Animal comes out to a door with a handle on. It doesn't occur to him to try to turn the handle and open the door. Whereas with the human being, our consciousness is on a higher level, so we look at situations and try to figure out how to open a door if something is there in front of us. I'm gonna, okay, any questions or comments before we move ahead? Now, DK quotes from the old commentary, and it's a fairly long quote, but every time he quotes from the old commentary, it's so deep that it's about the only thing I can do is actually read it word for word, because it's always very deep and has a lot in it. So as we read through this, keep in mind that water is a symbol of the emotions. Okay, I'll start reading from this. The assuaging waters cool. They slowly bring relief, abstracting form from all that can be touched. The quivering fever heat of long repressed desire yields to the cooling draught. Water and pain negate each other. Long is a process of the cooling draught. The burning fire releases all that blocks the way of life. Bliss comes and follows after fire, as fire upon the waters. Water and fire together blend and cause the great illusion. Fog they produce, and mists and steam and noise, veiling the light, hiding the truth, shutting out the sun. Okay, so basically he's saying here that the emotions and then the the fire of mind blend together, and emotion and mind working together, not so much working but just uh, connecting with each other, produce a mist that goes up and creates an illusion and makes it hard for us to see what is real and what is not real. Okay, let me continue reading here. The fire burns fiercely. Pain and the waters disappear. Cold, heat, the light of day, radiance of the rising sun, and perfect knowledge of truth appear. Okay, the fire continues to burn, and it causes the mist of the water to disappear. And eventually, as the mind is developed, the emotions lose control and the mind gains more control. And then the person can see clear because the fog disappears, and he says, perfect knowledge of truth appears. This is a path of all who seek the light. First form and all its longing, then pain, then the assuaging waters and the appearance of a little fire. The fire grows, the fire is mind again, and heat is then active within the tiny sphere and does its fiery work. Moisture likewise is seen, dense fog, and to the pain is added sad bewilderment. For they who use the fire of mind during the early stage are lost within the light illusionary. Fierce grows the heat. Next comes the loss of power to suffer. That's interesting. The loss of power to suffer. That's nice to have, huh? When this stage has been outgrown, there comes the shining of the unobstructed sun and the clear, bright light of truth. This is the path back to the hidden center. Use pain. Call for the fire, O pilgrim, in a strange and foreign land. The waters wash away the mud and slime of nature's growth. The fires burn the hindering forms which seek to hold the pilgrim back, and so they bring release. The living waters, as a river, sweep the pilgrim to the Father's heart. The fires destroy the veil hiding the Father's face. Okay, so that's a very deep language expressing how the disciple progresses from being controlled by the emotions, and then he lights up the fire of mind. And then when the fire of mind begins to express itself, it stirs up the emotions, creates a fog, and then that fog eventually has to be dissipated. Then what is dissipated, then the person begins to see clearly, and eventually the fires destroy the veil hiding the Father's face. What do you think that means? The fires destroyed the veil hiding. What's the veil hiding the Father's face?
I think it's the illusion of our five senses.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. And another one would be the emotions, negative emotions, fear, anger, hate, all those things that control us, that creates part of the veil. Okay. Anyway, those are really deep. If you have the book, you might read it through a couple times. That is a lot of deep thinking there. I always think that there's a number of people claim to be channeling DK, and they don't sound anything like DK. But I think one of the first things I look for in somebody that claims to be channeling DK is, are they quoting from the old commentary? and no one has ever tried to duplicate the depth of the writing in the old commentary, and DK quotes it quite often. And when he does quote it, it's always very deep thought that is relayed. And so I anticipate that when he does work through someone else again or write again, or because he indicates that he is going to teach again, that one of the ways to recognize him will be some quotes from the old, new quotes from the old commentary, because
Well,
they
that
have.
may or may not be true. H.P. Blavatsky quoted the old commentary quite often.
Yeah, did she? Well,
Yes.
then I don't remember her ever mentioning the old commentary.
Well, she calls it the stanzas of Dezan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the old commentary, though. That's the very ancient stanzas, but I think it's a separate record. Yeah. But yeah, DK quotes the stanzas of Dizon too. Dion. Okay, so anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing some future quotes from the old commentary and the new teachings that will come one of these days. Says the individual must learn to stand alone in the truth, no matter what others think, to move forward in the path. This is an important point for the disciple to learn, to stand as a ground no matter what. I'm sure that some people here, when you first kind of went from kind of ordinary thinking to maybe exploring a little bit, had people that tried to take you back to where you were. Now, Adam, you grew up in the Mormon church. When you kind of started exploring outside of regular church doctrines, did you have some friends that become concerned?
They still are. The problem is, JJ, that I've read most of your stuff, if not all of it, and they just don't like coming and talking to me anymore for some reason.
Yeah.
They find that what I have to say is difficult to, it's difficult to refute, and they have a hard time even swallowing what I have to present on Mormonism and things that Joseph Smith said, and so it's actually I appreciate when I get into discussions with them, actually, because I find it invigorating and fun, but they don't even want to go there anymore, so most of them kind of avoid me.
Yeah, it's hard to find people willing to discuss things out of their comfort zone.
When I lived in California, the two Mormon boys used to come around on their bicycles, and I'd invite them in, and I'd have a discussion with them for several hours. And I always told them, don't limit yourself. Try to
Yeah.
open your
I'm
mind.
surprised. I'm surprised they stayed for a couple hours.
They were fascinated with what I told them.
Really? Well, good. Well, you must not have been that scary to them. That's good, Edward, that you were able to adjust to their wavelength somewhat. Yeah,
Well,
I remember a while back, Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on my door, and I had an old pamphlet I had written on the Bible and reincarnation. And I said, they wanted me to read their Watchtower magazine. I said, I'll read yours if you read mine. And I handed them that, and they looked at the thing, said the Bible and reincarnation, and they acted like the guy acted like he was holding a hot coal in his hand. And he got really nervous, and they excused themselves fast as they could get out of there. But so it's, yes, there people are nervous when you're when they get out of their comfort zone. Now, Edward is kind of a nice guy, so he probably was pretty gentle with those Mormons. That's probably why he didn't scare them.
I like to sense the frequency of their listening.
Yeah.
There were a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses that used to come around where I lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They were in the next block over. And I would attempt to keep them in conversation for as long as I could.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's funny how each religion has their own language, so to speak. If you talk to a Mormon, you got to kind of talk Mormonese. You talk to a Jehovah's Witness, you got to talk really literal Bible language with them. And talk to a born-again type Christian fundamentalist, you have to kind of adjust to their wavelength and speak on their in their language. I remember me and Curtis one time, we were out and about, and we come across this. We had some literature. We were at that time we had this pamphlet we wrote called The Bible and Reincarnation, and we had a bunch of these printed up, and we were in circulation, and so we were going around and visiting different religions, and what was funny is, even if we didn't bring up reincarnation or anything, when we went and just entered a building where they were having an event and started talking to them, there was something about us that just made them suspicious. And they would say, they'd all of a sudden stop and they'd say, "You saved by the blood of Jesus?" That was a test they would often ask us. And we'd say, "Well, we think we're saved as much as anybody is." So anyway, if you don't answer them just exactly right, well, then all of a sudden they got a red flag goes up. They eyeball you as an outsider, and so they're you have to speak, and each group has their own language. Now, esoteric groups are similar like this too. Some people are like so much into say DK that we're studying right now that that's about the only language they understand, that they haven't really reached into ordinary language that they can discuss esoteric things with just kind of average people in the family or whatever, you know. But the good student needs to broaden himself out so he can take maybe complicated things that he's read and put them in language that his friends can understand if he wants to talk to other people. So that's what we try to do here, is we're trying to make his complicated teachings bring them down to earth, so that we can talk about them with anybody. Because really the principles in white magic are principles that that have many principles that just even average people can apply in their lives. He says, through right use of mind and through correct understanding of nature, of the nature of the intellect, man can enter into the mind of God and know that all is well, for all is plan and divine purpose is steadily working out its objectives. Okay? Entering into the mind of God. That's an interesting statement. Okay, let's pick on somebody here. Dinan, do you think, what do you think about that? Have you ever considered yourself entering into the mind of God? Or being one, or
not
think,
really.
or being one in thought with him or her?
We do. I had 10 years in Jungian psychology and studied to be an analyst, and then realized I couldn't do it. But I did. I do have conversations and feel like I pretend that God is listening to me and talking to me and what He would say to me. But I've never thought entering. I wrote that down. I like that, entering into the mind of God.
Yeah. So, in other words, there are certain times in your life that you feel a lot closer to spirit than other times, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Right. And during those times of we're on a spiritual high, does it, when you think about it, does it seem like maybe you're tuning into the mind of God? Does it feel that way sometimes?
Not yet, but I do feel. I feel, since I've been living far away from my family, and I know no one out here. I live on the North Shore of Boston, and I came here 7 years ago to help with my granddaughter. But I feel this little place with hearing the ocean. I do feel a presence of the spirit more than I ever have in my life.
Oh, great.
And I've always been afraid to be alone, and I've never been afraid here. And there's windows all around it. It's like the fear, that's something that I can't explain it, but I just feel like I have this connection that I didn't have before.
Well, good. Okay, so that's a really good thing to contemplate on. Focus on thinking of yourself, entering into the mind of God. Now, on another level, if a person is in tune with love, the true nature of love, he probably also enters into the heart of God. So contemplate, that's a really good thing for us to contemplate the next week as a seed thought. Entering into the heart of God and the mind of God. Love opens the door for the heart of God, and higher thought enters into the mind of God. He continues and says, in Atlantean times, disciples sought the understanding of the love of God. Now it is the will of God. Through mind, humans dominate the lower kingdoms. Man is therefore brought into line with the esoteric head center of the one life, the planetary logos. Okay? So that might be an interesting thing to clarify here, is exactly what is the planetary logos, what or who? Now, the planetary logos has been called the Ancient of Days, and is the planetary logos an individual, or is it something maybe greater, or what do we mean? What does he mean when he speaks of the planetary logos? What do you think?
It's the ruling being of this particular globe.
Okay.
It's
one of the Kumaras.
But so, somebody else had something. Who else?
He's one of the Kumaras.
Oh, Ken? Okay.
There's also the indwelling entity that is the planet itself, the consciousness of the planet itself, that the Ancient of Days is attempting to help bring to its full potential.
Okay. We have the Ancient of Days, Sanat Kimura, and then we have what is called the Spirit of the Earth. And then in addition to this, the Earth has a higher self itself, which is beyond what we think of as the planetary logos. But the planetary logos is more than Sanat Kimura. How can we say, how is the planetary logos more than Sanat Kimura?
Well, Sanat Kimura is the personality of the logos, it said.
Yeah, that's true. And he might be, what we might look at it this way, is the planetary logos is a combination of all the lives on the earth, and the Sanat Kimura is really, it might be more precise to call him the representative of the spokesman, so to speak, of the logos, of the entire logos. He's the main spokesman. He is the one that tunes in. He's such an advanced being, he can tune into the life of the entire planet.
Like the T1 of a triad.
Yeah, something like that, I guess, on a lower level. But he can tune in to all life on the planet. But so you have two aspects of it. You have him being the representative, because before he came here like what was it, 21 million years ago. Now, before he came here, there was still the planetary logos was still here, and that was a combination of all life upon the earth. But when he came here, he assumed that position of the spokesman, the representative of all life upon the earth. So he is the representative of life on the earth. So he is often, because he is at one with the logos, he is often called the logos himself. But the logos is actually all life upon the earth. And then on a lower level, you have the spirit of the earth, and which is kind of like the vital energy of our physical body. And then on a higher level, you have like us as individuals, we have a higher self. The earth has a higher self that we don't hear much about. Yeah.
One of the things that we're not considering here is the matter side. The higher part of the matter side is the angelic beings, the devas, the elementals.
Yeah.
There's this angelic presence that represents the mother matter. Like in Latin, matter means mother.
Right. The devas represent the female aspect, and the human lives represent the male aspect of the planet. But as I understand it, the logos itself would be all the lives combined. And okay, any other comments or questions on that? It's kind of interesting to contemplate. He says, man, the brain of nature. Animals are the expression of the heart. The vegetable world is the expression of the creative force or the throat. Center. These three kingdoms in nature, forming in a peculiar manner, correspond to the higher three centers in man. As three kingdoms on the evolutionary correspond to the lower three centers. The mineral kingdom, abstruse as the idea may seem to those of you who have not the consciousness of the life aspect, correspond to the solar plexus, the great clearinghouse between that which is above and that which is below. So it's interesting how the different kingdoms correspond to the center. Man corresponds to the brain of the earth. The animals correspond to the heart. And um, the vegetables correspond to the throat center, and so on. And so we have all these correspondences, which are interesting to contemplate. Now, in the past, he says the correspondences were different. And in the Lemurian days, the humanity expressed the solar plexus, while the animal kingdom stood for the sacral center, and the center of the base of the spine was symbolized by the vegetable. Now, we're told in esoteric teaching that all three aspects of divinity are themselves triple, and hence we can divide the energy of mind as far as humanity is concerned into three aspects also. We have, therefore, the lower concrete mind. It's called the chitta or mind stuff in the writings of Patanjali. Now, then we have the abstract mind, which is that aspect of mind which is related to the world of ideas. And then the third division is the intuitive. So what's the difference between the lower mind and the higher mind? What do you think?
Well, the lower mind is most people think about their feelings. Most people, the mind works on things that can be perceived with their senses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, the lower mind is more connected to the physical brain, for one thing, and it's also very controlled by the feelings. Those who are centered in their lower mind are often dominated by their feelings. Even though the mind has power over the feelings, if the person is centered in the lower mind, he just doesn't realize that. He thinks if he feels a certain way, he's got to go with the flow of the feelings. But then when he develops the abstract mind is related to ideas, and it can it can understand ideas and concepts and thinks on a higher level than just the regular calculating brain. It's a little bit like the guy on the computer. A computer program operates as it's according to its program. Now, the abstract mind is kind of like the guy operating the computer. He can go beyond the program. Okay, so he can use the program in ways the program cannot use itself. And so he's operating on a higher level. The abstract mind is a connecting link between the lower and the higher. If the person develops this higher aspect of mind, and the mind, and this is one thing that DK stresses throughout his writings, is the importance of the mind. He says the plane of the mind is the plane whereupon the masters can be found. Now, many people mistake emotions and heart, and they think they think spiritual access all has to be done through the heart. And unfortunately, many people, the highest they go in their feeling nature is on the astral level, and they don't get up to the higher energies of love, wisdom, because the higher energies of heart is connected to wisdom, which is also connected to the higher mind. And so a person has to develop this higher aspect of mind to have to enter into the fullness of love, the love wisdom aspect. And then the higher part, the highest part connected to mind that we can relate to anyway, is the intuition, which he calls pure reason. And so so what's the difference between, say, just abstract thinking? You're thinking of maybe concepts, and you're learning things, and you get ideas, but intuition transcends that. What happens when you have an intuitive flash? This is a word he uses for intuition that really spoke to me the first time I read it, when he talks about receiving intuition in a flash. Does that relate to anybody? Have you ever had like a flash of intuition come where all of a sudden you understood something you didn't understand before?
Yes, many times.
Right. So when that happens, do you seem to understand everything about it when it comes?
It's
Does
an
it come with
awareness.
understanding?
And it's an awareness. It's something that it's difficult to put into words.
Okay.
I like to use a distinction of the vertical focus, the vertical alignment, as opposed to the horizontal focus.
Okay, that's good. Now I'll bet John Klein, I bet you've had some flashes come. Does that speak to you about the word flash, like a flash of light coming with intuition? Does that
Yes,
register with you?
it's quite common. I call it Viveka. It's where you actually it's where you've got one foot in one side and one foot in the other. You realize you see both sides, the true and the false at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can explain it. It's really hard to put in the words, but it's like the snake and the rope. You walk along and you look down and you say, "Oh my God, a snake!" And then you realize it's not a snake. It's just that instant when you realize you thought it was a snake and now it's not a snake. And that's not much of a thing.
Gives us a general
But
idea.
it's just it's instantaneous. It just happens.
Okay.
And you don't have any doubt. There's no doubt with it. It's no, well, did I think that or did I not think that? It's not thinking.
Yeah, that's a great part about it is, like you say, it's instantaneous. Whereas, now let's go through these three aspects of mind here. The first is the lower concrete mind. The lower concrete mind, it's got to take in facts, okay? In the say the elements are named A, B, C, and you memorize all the elements, or you memorize what the elements are about, or whatever. So you go through regular learning and you memorize stuff, and that's how the regular mind works. Okay, the abstract mind goes beyond just, you learn beyond memorizing. You learn by thinking. Okay, you take what you've memorized maybe and you say, well, let's take fact A and see how it relates to fact B and see how that relates to fact C and see what kind of conclusion we can come up with. So this is a higher aspect of mind. It does more than just memorizing. And that's the trouble with school. They just speak to the lower mind. They just have us go to school and then have us memorize a whole bunch of stuff rather than teach us how to reasoning, where the abstract mind puts pieces together. Now, after we develop the abstract mind, we start putting the pieces together. We will often reach dead ends. We think, well, I can't really, I related all these things together and I can't really get the full picture. And you think about it, and then all of a sudden you'll get a flash. And this is where the intuition comes in. The higher part of yourself has looked at all that information and it's figured it out. So it sends you a flash of intuition and a picture in your mind as to how it all fits together. And all of a sudden you go, aha. And this is often called by spiritual students an aha moment.
Right. You have to be still and know.
Right. So Cindy, have you had an aha moment in your life a number of times?
I've had a few of them, JJ.
I'll bet you have. They're great moments, though, aren't they?
They are. You never forget them.
Better than sex, really. Just it's good. But yeah, aha moments are really great. They don't come every day, but when they do come, it's often as a result of doing a lot of thinking first, thinking on every level, and then all of a sudden you'll get an aha moment. And then when the aha moment comes, you'll almost kick yourself because you'll think it's so obvious, how come I never saw it? But now that I do see it, it makes perfect sense.
JJ, I have seen it happen as an observer myself. When I was a teacher, I often saw it happen. You can see it happen on the face of a student. And I used to describe it as the light bulb going on.
Yeah.
You know, that you see it in their face. They all of a sudden they get it. And of course, I don't think they realize it, what the implications are on an esoteric level, but you can actually see it in the face of someone if you're in the presence of them when it happens.
Yeah.
When it happens to me, and it has many times, I just describe it as a moment of clarity that wasn't there before. I think that, I mean, that's an oversimplification perhaps, but it's a clarity that wasn't there before. And often I've thought, well, why did I never see it before? Then it has to have something to do with some kind of divine intervention to help me see it, to give me that push to see it.
Yeah. What's interesting, sometimes what's really interesting about it is when you have that aha moment, it seems so obvious that you feel like kicking yourself for not seeing it earlier. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it's fairly complex and you say, well, I can see why I didn't see it earlier. But other times you think, how silly of me that I didn't see this earlier. And so that's a great part about the aha moment is, like you say, it brings clarity. Now, Rick, I bet you've had some aha moments. Did you have an aha moment when you got your invention idea on building an artificial island?
Yeah, there was
That pixel invention you come up with.
I actually invented that sitting in a high school biology class back
Really?
in late 60s.
Way back then, huh?
Yeah, the teacher was explaining how cells that are connected to each other and typically just bags of water, how they become a rigid thing. I think the guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And he was explaining this, that they pressurize the cells themselves and they push against each other and it forms rigidness. And I was sitting there in class and a light bulb came up on above my head and I thought to myself, someday I'm going to invent something that uses that. And so it's been going on since the 60s. The one thing about, I was going to suggest that if you want to have more aha moments, one of the best ways I've found is ask questions in your mind that only God knows the answer to. And if you ask enough time, boom, it'll come to you. The light bulb will light up and oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's the key. You got to ask questions. You got to be curious. People that aren't curious usually don't have the aha moments, but the people that have them are the people that are curious and really want to know stuff. Yeah, Ed?
You have to seek and you'll find.
Right. So you can find really simple process, but not
The
enough
truth is
to
out
it.
there.
I'm glad to see the group here is our big seekers. So anyway, to wrap this up, he points out that these three aspects of mind, once they're fully developed, you know, that helps us to access all the higher levels that we need to seek as we complete our path and journey back home. Okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Well, it's often mentioned that we have to build the antakarana. It's like a fiber optic connection to the source.
Yeah, right. And
I've also observed that if you experience any kind of enlightenment, there's a good number of your friends that you don't want to discuss that with.
yeah, that's true. You got to be careful about what you discuss as far as higher principles with just ordinary friends you might have, and family especially.
You have to listen for their listening.
Yeah, I got a couple members of my family I can talk anything with, and then there's others that you just talk about regular stuff, you know. Okay. Well, we'll want to give a big welcome to Deanne today. I'm really glad you showed up and hope to see you next time. And we'll be posting future meetings and notifying you. So we'll look forward to seeing you for the next meeting.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for your hearts and prayers
Thank you.
for my family. And I'm really glad to be here. Really
Okay,
glad.
looks like your son's a really nice guy, so we hope he mends quickly.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, over and out. We'll see you guys for the next meeting then.
Okay, bye-bye. And happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, happy birthday.
Yeah, I'll be 74 years old tomorrow, believe it or not.
Well, you
So
don't look it.
you're just a youngster.
One of these days I might be as old as Ed.
Yeah, you're you're just a youngster.
4 years and you catch Moses, JJ.
Yeah, right.
I'm older than dirt.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see you guys later. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
coming.
JJ.
Everybody.
Good night.
Good night.